So we've obviously got you here to talk about imposter syndrome, and we're lucky enough to have Sarah with us, who later on is going to give you a professional's point of view on things and hopefully give you some tools that can help you out with imposter syndrome. But I'm going to kick things off because Sarah and I have been discussing it for some time. We think it would be helpful for me to give you kind of a personal point of view on things. And I thought, to normalise this, it'd be helpful to have a bit of a show of hands actually from you guys to understand how many of you have felt that imposter syndrome, that feeling like you're a fraud, that feeling like you're going to get caught out, like found out. How many of you have felt that in your career? Excellent. Right, I have absolutely both hands up. I absolutely have. And what I want to do, I want to start by almost kind of congratulating you on it. It's a sign of intelligence. It's a sign of self-awareness. As long as it doesn't get in your way, it can be a fuel that forces you to get better. There's an element of humility about it. And some wonderful people out there, including you guys, have imposter syndrome. And if you don't believe me, listen to these people. This is their words. Tom Hanks said, "When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away from me?" Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, "There are still days when I wake up feeling like a fraud, not sure I should be where I am." David Bowie, rather profoundly, "I was driven to get through life very quickly. I really felt so utterly inadequate." And then Emma Watson, "Any moment someone's going to find out I'm a total fraud. I can't possibly live up to what everyone thinks I am and what everyone's expectations of me are." This is, some of our most incredible actors, artists, business people, and even a frickin' 12-year-old wizard is feeling it. So you're not alone. We all feel this, okay? And what about the people that don't feel it? What about the flip side? You consider that for a moment. And this isn't universal. I'm just going to hypothesize that maybe people that don't feel it at all, maybe they lack some self-awareness. Maybe they lack some humility, and potentially some of them, just a very few of them, maybe you could even say they were ignorant. As an example, it's obvious, apologies, but I'm almost certain that he doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome. Now, as I said to you at the very beginning, I do big time, and I think that's why Sarah wanted me to get up here and talk to you about it, because you probably look at me and you probably think CEO, middle-aged, grey hair, white man. So far, such a cliche. But what you probably don't see are the building blocks underneath that. You don't see the kid that grew up on a council estate in London with a father who, didn't work for most of his life, who was bipolar, who was alcoholic. You don't see the kid that flunked his GCSEs, pretty much just got in to do my A-levels, and I didn't even get to do A-levels. I did GMBQ Advanced, which is a very poor man's version of A-levels. And then the person who quit university after 18 months. You don't see any of that. You just see me today. And I can assure you those building blocks that I had, they damn well guaranteed that when I began my career and all the way through, I had imposter syndrome at every level. And the best way I can describe this, because I've had a session with Sarah where I've actually talked about it, I treated life like a computer game. At every single level, when I started my first job, I started with the imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough, I'm going to get found out. God, I can't believe I even got this job. Then I suss out everybody else that's working with me, not in a super competitive way, but just sort of realise that, hold on, I can compete here. And in fact, maybe I can thrive. And then bit by bit, you get to the next level. That's how I was. At the next level, straight away, again, the imposter syndrome kicked in. And it was like that. Even when we moved to Brighton, I wanted to meet all the CEOs of the businesses that do what we do in this neck of the woods. So I wanted to know, can we compete? Can I compete? It was a computer game. And I start with that imposter syndrome. And I would say it held me back. And that's why it's important we get together and normalise it and bring people like Sarah into our business to help sort of arm you with the tools you need to cope with it and to make sure it doesn't hold you back. Use it as a force for good. Now, one chap that really helped me was a guy called Oliver Burkeman, and he doesn't know he helped me because he just wrote an article for The Guardian, and it was titled, "Everybody is totally winging it all of the time." Brilliant article if you can find it. And he explains that throughout his career, he couldn't wait to meet the adults. He was sure that at every level, as he went through his journalistic career, that he was eventually going to find the people that were competent and were not winging it. And he never did, nor did his friends. Some of his friends went on to the highest office politically in the US and in the UK. And he said, everybody is totally freaking winging it all of the time. Now, in that article, it wasn't just that normalisation that I felt this huge sigh of relief, because I'd never really talked to anyone about it before. But in the article, he gave what I feel is like the most profound insight about imposter syndrome generally that I've ever had. And I want to share it with you. In his language, he said, we are all energetically projecting an image of calm proficiency, while inside we're improvising in a mad panic. So in my own language, when I translated that, what I realised I was doing, and this is what I think I can probably help you guys with, is I was judging what I was feeling on the inside versus what everybody else was projecting on the outside. So you know you've been in a pitch or you're in an interview or something, and you're inside, you're churning up, you've got this mad panic going on, even though you're diligent and you've done your work and you're smart, and you're judging how you're feeling on the inside with how everybody else looks on the outside. Trust me, everybody feels the same, including me. And luckily for us, we've got people like Sarah in our business that can help us. So I'll hand you over to Sarah.
So earlier this week, I got an email from somebody asking me to go and speak at a conference in Paris next year. It said things like that they were looking for somebody who would be energizing and inspiring. Now, I talk for a living. I've been working in learning and development for about 20 years. You guys know me because I come and talk here every month. I've also run workshops. I'm a specialist in mental toughness. And even with all of that, the little voice in my head said, engaging and inspiring, that's not you. They clearly have never met you. What are they doing asking you to do that? Yeah. And that's what we're talking about, this little voice, this imposter syndrome that crops up and tries to sabotage us, okay? It also feels quite vulnerable. I don't know if Sam felt this as well. It feels quite vulnerable to stand up here and to say this to you, because there's a part of me, there's another, the same little voice currently saying, if you admit to this, to all of these people and on video, people won't want to work with you because they will now think that you genuinely don't know what you're doing. But if we never talk about this, then it becomes this thing that we all think is just going on inside us. Okay, so that's why I think we decided to get up here and say, do you know what, if you notice this sometimes, you're not on your own. And it's important to remember that. So maybe you're listening to this, maybe you're watching this and thinking you have no idea what we're talking about and never experienced this, but many, many people do. And those of you who are here in the room with me, what do you tell yourself about getting a job here at RocketMill? You don't have to share that with me right now, but how many of you genuinely believe that you got the job here because you are great at what you do, you did a brilliant interview, you are the best in your class at doing what you do? I'll just leave that for a moment and let you have a think about it, yeah? Chances are, some of you will have a little voice that says, actually, maybe it was just good luck that I got the job. Maybe I was just the best of an average bunch at the time, yeah? The chances are you might think it was just a fluke that you got here. And there's probably, that little voice that says at some point somebody's going to point a big finger at me and go, what are you doing here? Yeah? This is RocketMill. How did you get in here? Yeah? Maybe you don't think that. But chances are there's a bit of that going on for some of you. Now, you won't experience this all the time. Nobody experiences imposter syndrome all the time. There are things in your life that you do without experiencing that voice that says you don't know what you're doing. Yeah? Nobody experiences imposter syndrome whilst making a cup of tea. Yeah? But we often, as Sam said, we often experience it when we're new in a job and when we're in a job where we have quite high expectations of ourselves. But there are some situations where it's more prevalent. So you are more likely to experience imposter syndrome if you are the first to do something or in a minority. So for instance, if you're the first in your family to go to university, if you are atypical in your field, so women in traditionally male roles often experience imposter syndrome. If you have high achieving parents or siblings, You have a strong belief that others have high expectations of you. If you have high expectations of yourself, you may often feel a need to be perfect. Otherwise, people will notice that you are not good at what you do. If you work in a creative industry, it's difficult to benchmark for success in creativity, so it's difficult to know if you're doing well. If you achieved success relatively easily, and this is a really interesting one for me. So if you got where you got to quite easily, there's a sense of, how did that happen? I didn't have to work hard for it, so I must not be very good at it. Equally, if you had to work really hard for something, often that little voice says, you had to work really hard to do this, to achieve this, therefore you must not be as good as other people who on the outside looked as though they were doing it really easily. And lastly, if you got promoted before you felt ready. Now, none of that applies to anybody here, right? You might even have been ticking some of those off as we went along. Here's the good news though. Not a single one of us is really an imposter. It's impossible that we are all in fact not good enough. It's impossible that Sam and the team only recruit frauds and flukes into this business. I can't believe that to be true. And certainly the business results would suggest that that's not the case. So I'd like to propose to you that the facts are that we are all just human beings who are good at some things and less good at others, who have to work hard sometimes, and sometimes we find things easy. Sometimes we're good enough, not perfect. Sometimes we're better at something that somebody else is, and sometimes they're better than we are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not good enough at it. And sometimes we know exactly what we're doing, and sometimes we're learning, and sometimes we are genuinely making it up as we go along, and that's okay too. Yeah? So here are a few ways in which you can manage imposter syndrome if you notice it in yourself. Number one, we've said this a couple of times, you are not alone, and I think that the first time that I mentioned this to a bunch of my friends around a dinner table, and they all went, oh yeah, I get that too. Yeah? And these are people who these days have titles that involve head of and director, and they're still kind of going, yeah, still making it up, still waiting for somebody to point at me and go, you're making it up every day. Yeah? So ask your friends and find out if they are still just making it up as they go along. The next one is, it's really important to remember that nobody's perfect. Yeah? If you were going to stand up here and give a talk, and I know many of you have and do regularly, what criteria would you set for yourself? You might think that you would need to be word perfect, that you would need to know everything there is to know about the subject, that if you were good at this, you wouldn't be nervous at all, that you'd be able to answer any questions without hesitation. And I challenge you by saying, is that a realistic definition of competence for somebody to stand up and have a go at giving a talk? Yeah. In an ideal world, maybe you would want all of those things, all of those boxes ticked. But we often don't use different standards to judge our own competence than the standards that we use to judge other people. Okay? So imposters use perfectionism as a shield to stop others from realising that they are imposters. And this can take up enormous amounts of energy. They work long hours and cause themselves lots of anxiety. Give up the need to be perfect at all times. You are human, and that means you will make mistakes. You are doing what you do because you are good enough and possibly even great at what you do. Have high standards, work hard, deliver great work, but also learn self-compassion. Sometimes it's going to go wrong, yeah? And we all need to learn not to beat ourselves up so much when it does go wrong. Listen to what's going on in your head. So this is take less notice of your inner critic. Almost all of our imposter syndrome comes from that little voice and the sabotaging messages it gives us. Notice it for what it is. Just that. It's a sabotaging mechanism, okay? That little voice that tells me that I can't possibly go and speak in front of 500 people and be engaging and inspiring is almost certainly lying. I've been doing this for 20 years. I can probably manage half an hour for 500 people. But why does it do it? What's it there? What's its purpose? Well, I reckon it's trying to keep me safe. So every time I think about doing something that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, like speaking in front of 500 people or standing up here and declaring myself to also have imposter syndrome, the little voice tries to stop me from doing that because I'm vulnerable. Yeah? It doesn't want me to step outside of my comfort zone. I don't have to listen to it, I don't have to believe it, and I don't have to obey it. Yeah? I can just say, thank you for trying to keep me safe. That's okay. I've got this. It's going to be okay. Yeah? And often I'll add a little bit after that, which is, it doesn't need to be perfect. Yeah? So try swapping out some of the critical messaging that you notice for some other things. Just some examples here. I must be perfect. We can swap that out for it's okay to be good enough. Yeah? I can't fail. We can swap that out for failure as part of learning. You don't know what you're doing. We can swap that out for it's okay to ask questions or to work this out as I go. Yeah? None of us came into this world knowing everything there is to know. Yeah? We're always going to be learning. And my last tip for you is this. What you feel is not who you are. Feeling like an imposter does not make you an imposter. Feeling like an imposter, as Sam said, can sometimes get in the way of us being as great as we could be. These thoughts and feelings probably cause you more stress and anxiety than is really helpful. So ask yourself this. How would your life be different if you saw yourself the way that other people see you? Not as a fraud, not as an imposter, but as someone creative, capable, interesting, valuable, and important. As someone who absolutely deserves to be doing what they're doing. What would change in your world if you could believe that about yourselves? Thank you.